All right, everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's episode is about inspecting an oiled clarinet body and starting to polishing the posts. Don't forget to give a thumbs up, subscribe, and like, and share afterwards. Now we're going to get right to it. So let me change cameras here. We can actually look at the clarinet bodies up close, and we'll talk about it more. Okay, here we go. You'll see there's another upper joint here for a specific reason. These clarinet bodies look really good. This is the one we oiled yesterday. It still has a lot of oil on the surface, as you can see here. And it's actually, you can see it pulling up on the edge here, dripping out of the bore. So this body was really nicely preserved. I keep the shop temperature humidity actually between 40 and 50% humidity. That keeps when I work with wood, because I also do woodworking, it keeps the wood stable, and that works for clarinet joints also. The lower body is really good, and you can actually see down here there's a little pool of oil there. So these bodies are actually really good. Normally what you would do is a wood body would soak up the oil, you would oil it again, bolt down the bore on the surface, and every 2 or 3 days you repeat that. You look at it, is it dry? You oil it again. So I brought out this other body here. This is actually a Yvette and Schaefer K series. This is a buffet made upper joint. I got the lower joint too. And I did because I knew this one was dry. I could tell by the coloration of the wood. And if you notice, see how dry this is? This was oiled just like it is up here. You can see the oil in the top part of the upper joint, and every place else is dry. And I oiled this the same way as I did the other one, but in less time. This has only been a couple hours like this. And this one is still all wet on the surface. And this one is just soaked up everything. So like this body will probably get another 3 or 4 oilings at the most, or at the least, I should say, before it becomes more stable. But here's an example of one that's just simply all dried up. So you can see it's wet up here and totally dry back here. And it just soaked up everything in hours. And this has been a day, and it's all wet. My hands is all oily now. It's all wet. Now, as I mentioned in the last episode, if you plan on having the clarinet sit for a while, you may want to use a synthetic oil, because natural oils, you know, they can basically turn green over time. Basically start corroding stuff, get verdigris and all that stuff. And synthetic oils do have other benefits too. There's multiple types of synthetic oils out there. You know, like I mentioned before, just using regular Selmer bore oil, buffet, micro bore oil, whatever you can get is better than nothing. Okay, because remember, the use of oil, whether natural or synthetic, is to displace and prevent water from getting into the wood, because the water is the thing you do not want, as we've shown when we oiled the barrel compared to the bell, and now the body as we have here. Now, real briefly, I used to dabble in oil submersion. That's where you take a joint and you actually put in a bucket, basically, and it's submerged in oil. And you leave it that way for a couple days so the body absorbs all that it wants. But I found out that depending upon the types of wood you want, because I was doing barrels too, and some of the lighter fiber wood barrels became soggy. The wood became soggy. And so I shied away from this because I don't want a wood body to get soggy. Anyways, so I stopped doing that and just went to this routine altogether. Because really with also with submersion, the problem I had was you really had to take all the posts off too, because you don't want the oil at all to pull up underneath the posts and you don't notice it there. And then later on would leach out or leak out. And if it's natural oil, it could turn green a bit or something over time. So I got away from that. But Of course, you take the post out, you're able to drip dry it, and it takes several days for that. And I really just thought this was a better routine. I'd oil it. It would sit in a bucket for a while, take it out, inspect it, oil again, sits in a bucket. So I can do multiple ones and just keep a rolling inventory of clarinets rolling. So I think oiling by hand, especially if you don't have the setup routine to do submersion and drip drying, is really a good method of doing it. Now, like I mentioned with this one, this K series Yvette Schaefer body, it's going to take probably, geez, the bore is all dry, and I oiled that too. Wow. It really soaked up the oil. It's going to take at least 4 applications. So at least another 2-3 weeks. And as it absorbs oil, of course, when it absorbs oil over time, the wood on that oil and the fibers swell a little bit or go back to its natural state, really, because live timber has oils in it. Well, depending upon which part of the branch you get it from. We'll talk about it in another episode about woods. But anyways, if you ever inspected a really dried clarinet, which I have, and taken measurements, the bore was not anywhere near circular. And after oiling for a bit, it reabsorbed the oil and reshaped itself the way it was manufactured mostly. And it became basically back to specification. So oiling has its benefits. It makes the wood more stable and keeps water out of the wood, which could help with cracks. Well, I should say be a bad thing with cracks. So oiling your clarinet body, especially mentioned in another episode, especially look at the barrel. You can check the other episode about the barrel and the upper joint. That's the indicators for you. But next, what we're going to do, we're going to learn about ragging a bit. Now, ragging is a form of polishing. We're going to use the metal polish used before for the barrel and bell rings. But this time, we can use paper towel if we want. And that's not a bad idea on certain posts like these side posts for the side keys and lower joint. But really over time, you want to get to what's called ragging, where we use basically, I mentioned, like shoelace type material. And I have examples of it over here. Thin and thick. A thin material for below the springs, between the spring and the body, and a thicker material just to get all over the rest of the place. Now, I only use ragging after I machine polish everything. Now, I mentioned I normally machine polish everything. This is a polishing wheel, buffing wheel, put on a taper here for a lathe, actually. I use it also on a bench mortar. But when these spin, you gotta be careful because you want to, when you polish this, you polish it with the wheel spinning with the direction of the springs. If you do it the other way, you're going to basically strip off the springs, and that's just more work for you to do. So that happens first, that especially if the keywork is really, really gray and rough and brown, these different polishes. I'll start out with a cutting polish here. It'll take off the really, really rough texture and grit that's on metal. Then I'll use a more of a better polishing compound, make it more brilliant white. And then in the end, I'll use a brilliant white polish, which makes it really, really shiny, really brilliant. And I'll follow that up with some ragging to clean up the little areas that you can't pick up with a polishing wheel. So it takes some time to polish this, and we're going to do a little bit by hand here without using a machine, so you can see how it's done at home. But really, the metal polish cleans it up really, really nicely. And depending on how much time you put into it, you can really make it really brilliant. It may take some time, but it's worth it. It's your clarinet, of course. Now, what I had to do here is something I don't ever do, but because of the camera setup, I had to set this up so we can actually see what we're doing here. So here we are once again. I want to show you the ragging cloths. This one here and this one here. Taking a look at this again, we got the thin one and thick one. The thick one is about 1/2 inch wide, 14 millimeters wide. The thin one is was that like 1/3 of an inch wide, 10 millimeters wide. So two different thicknesses, and just showing you here, this one gets between the post and the spring easily, whereas this thicker one you can get between there too. Just takes a little bit of work. So you can just use one if you want. It doesn't really matter. I mean, you can learn to thread this through. But when you get to places where the spring is even closer to the body, such as these keys here, there's not much room there. There's no room on this one. Just a little bit on that one. That's where the thinner one comes into play. So we're going to start in. There are posts here that you can clearly use just paper towel, usually thick paper towel, some strong paper towel, like some workshop paper towel works really good too. You know, the trail key guide, kind of easy to do. Now you'll notice there's oil on here. You want to oil this before you start polishing, because once again, we don't want to get the polish into the wood. It's a pain to get out. You basically use an oil and a toothbrush to get it out, but it's an extra step. If you put oil on the body first, you don't have to worry about it. Then it'll never get on there. Now, one thing you will have to worry about is getting it into the post holes where the screws go. We're going to do that in the next episode to clean those out using little brushes to do that, which is something you may not have. I'm trying to think of some alternative of dealing with that. But let's just kind of get started. And use a thick one first on this one post there. Just like everything else, like I did in the key work polishing episode, a little dab first. I'm going to start on this. And patience is the key. Notice it's already getting dirty. Thicker ones are a little bit harder to handle. You can also kind of fold it in half. Becomes easier to, whoops, got a little bit loose there. Doing that becomes a little bit easier to put in place. It's easier when it's a fixed amount lathe that doesn't move at all, and I can work a little bit quicker. But I didn't pre-polish this, pre-machine polish this, so I'm doing more than I normally would. Before I'm usually just touching it up. Here I'm actually polishing it. Look at all that black. I use a different section here. Then go to the small one. You see it's a little bit easier to control. I'm just gonna dab it on here. A little bit of dab there. Ooh, look at that. You see this here, since I oiled the body, this just kind of wipes off and doesn't really affect anything, because the oil just prevents it from getting into the grain. Take this up. We're going to try to polish this up a little bit more. Paper towel a little bit if you want. Look at that now. That is so much more polished than even this post right next to it. And even this post, just the way it was. See this post here compared to this one now. So compare this post, the way it looks. Let me put white behind it. So this one now, all nicely polished. Feels nice and good now, whereas this one kind of feels a little bit grungy. Really, that's all there is to it. And use this again, pick up some of that polish there. Get under this key here just to show you. This one's harder because it's quite low. You may have to thread it underneath if you can. Bingo. You get that part underneath the spring right on the body. You'll notice don't worry about that because since the body has oil on it, it just wipes right off. You can see the gilding too up here. Just move it back and forth a bit. It's a hard place to polish, so I'm just gonna make sure it's polished, move it up the rag a bit. Looks good to me. Come back on the outside, do the other part of it. Now I'm going to get the top part of it here. Looks good. That one now is nicely polished too. You did a great job. You can spend more time, polish things, learn to do it, do it one time. You may end up doing the second and third time. The first time maybe a little bit rough, you get the bigger spots. Second time you start getting the smaller spots. Take your time. One of the biggest problems about ragging is if you get it stuck into the spring like this, the spring is going through the ragging cloth now. And you don't want that because you're going to break the spring off. So always double check before you do anything. Make sure it's not stuck in the spring. You got to make sure you get underneath it. See that? Free and loose. It's very easy to rag. Of course, doing this manually the entire time will take some time. But if you don't have the equipment like you do in a shop, it's one way of doing it. You can do a little bit at a time. And you don't have to take keywork off either. Using this, you can just use a little bit at a time, clean things a little bit at a time. Just take your time. There's not much. Once again, the critical factor here is take your time, double check before you start moving, because you do not want a spring going through the rag cloth or through a shoelace or through a paper towel. It's kind of easy. Once again, the critical part is you oil the body just a little bit so that the cleaning polish, the metal polish in this case, doesn't get stuck in the wood grain. It just wipes right off, no problem whatsoever. Now the rest of this I'm going to machine polish because it's a lot faster. And then I'll follow up with a quick rag polish to make sure I get everything out of it. The next episode, we're actually going to look at cleaning the inside of each post to make sure there's no polish left in there. Anyways, I hope you have learned something today, and stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you for listening. Any questions or comments, please post them down below. Don't forget to give a thumbs up, like, share, and subscribe. You gotta love knowledge, gotta love life, and gotta love clarinets. We'll see you next time.